Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number 6B, a continuation. Deep Knowledge Track, IPSec in a Windows 2000 world.
Still has a choice to fill in everything. So for example, I may have made typos or mistakes or something about my email address, right? I have .org as opposed to .com. I could have lied about any of this information. I could be using friendly names that the company doesn't want me to use. I could have put in, profanity or something just bogus, right? It's the CA's issuance policy. It's how does the CA validate these fields? And in often cases, the CA won't take this input from a user or from somebody just filling out a form. They will decide these values themselves. All they really need is the public key in the request, right? So anyway, I filled in some information here, part of which is incorrect. I understand there is 802.11 in the building, so I'll pull out my wireless card and see if I can go online, and I'll show you the web, the internet CA that we have set up to just test it, which you can use. Basically, in this form, I'm allowed to choose a cryptographic service provider. I'll just choose the base cryptographic service provider, which does a lot of things, namely generate the RSA key pair. My machine has the strong cryptography pack installed, so I have the option of going beyond 1024 bits for keys. That is the public and private key pair that I generate. There's two different ways to do key generation. One is for data exchange, which is what that means. It doesn't mean email. It's data exchange. So if I want to encrypt data, then I can get a key pair for data exchange, or I can do signature key pairs. And this particular form doesn't automatically adjust the key sizes, but if I'm just doing a signature key, then I can go large, right? Even if I don't have the strong cryptography pack, because the certificate will only be used for signature. And there's no limit on the size of cryptography or export limit on cryptography, the purpose of signature, right? All it is very strong signature. But if I'm actually going to encrypt data with it, then there is limitations. And so with the strong crypto pack installed on this box, I'm able to go up a little higher. And of course, I never really want to use anything less than 1024, and I should use stronger keys than that if I can get away with it. I think the latest I've read is a 354-bit key or something, RSA key that was cracked. I mean, okay. I don't know then, but basically somewhere around 350 bits of RSA key, which is getting close to 512, and is not very close to 1024. And that's throwing massive computing power at it and so forth. So at least for the foreseeable future, that is the next couple of years, unless there's some quantum advance that's published, 1024 bits should be sufficient, but you can go higher. For IPSec, we're just doing signature, right? So you only need a signature key pair. The hash algorithm is the algorithm that's used in the certificate. It doesn't matter. What does matter, though, is this checkbox down here. It says use local machine store. So when you go to the online web page, or when third parties provide websites to do enrollment, if they're doing enrollment for, quote, IPSec, all IPSec means is that it's a machine cert. They'll talk about an IPSec cert, and there is technically a way to specify IPSec usage right here in what's called extended key usage. But not all PKI systems support this EKU field, the extended key usage field. So you may or may not have an IPSec usage, and so therefore the IPSec implementation in Windows 2000 doesn't require that the cert have an IPSec usage. It'll use a client authentication key usage field, essentially. All it requires is really the root name, a valid chain, the cert is used within its validity time, and a 512 or larger key size. Of course, it has to be resident in a local machine store. I can add other attributes and so forth, and then I can generate an output file name here. I wonder what I can do. I'll just temp, and then I'll say Black Hat example file. Now there should be some extension to that. I don't know. I won't put an extension on it. In fact, I'll just. Does it? Okay. See if it'll complain. All right, it complained. All right. So all I did was generate a public and private key pair, right? So my private key is stored inside the machine protected store. So that's basically an encrypted, I shouldn't say encrypted file system, it's an encrypted area of the registry that only the local system knows how to access. And I also have a public key, so if I go and I look, now I'm back to the beginning. If I go back in the, if you'll pardon me because this is my corporate laptop, I'll just switch off for a second and go to find that in the ctemp. It's protected by a symmetric private key, which is, so it's reversibly encrypted because it has to be. When the machine boots up, it's got to be able to reverse encrypt. But that symmetric private key is, again, I'll say obfuscated in a proprietary way and as strong as our cryptographers can possibly make it. It's basically based on the machine account password. And again, the machine account password is obfuscated in as strong as our cryptographers can make it. So it's not a perfect system in terms of protection, but you've got to break 2 or 3 layers of encryption in order to get there. If you can log on the machine, that machine cert's available to any user. Well, it's available to the local system. Right. Okay, user certificates are a different issue. User certificates have a hash of their password which encrypts their private key data. It's also called protected store, but it's stored differently because you have data that really authenticates the user that you don't have to store on the disk, which would essentially be a hash of their password. So for users, if you got a cert on the box, let me switch back now. If you got a user cert on this box, or I have user certs on the box, and you were able to log on, you can't access my private keys, and in fact, you'd have to break all the crypto protecting them in order to even see what they were, because you don't have my user ID and password to log on. So the fact of me logging on with my user ID and password unlocks my credentials, but doesn't unlock anybody else's credentials that can log on in the same box. Okay, so here's what happened with that cert request. I said in the temp directory, I just called it Black Hat Cert. I thought it would put an extension on it, but it didn't. All it is a text file, so I just edited that with Notepad, and this is what a PKCS10 format looks like. You can send this via email, or deliver it on a floppy, or post it in a web form. Cut and paste it into a website typically is how most of the CA vendors will take it. You just, highlight it and copy, and then you go over to your browser and you paste it in. Okay, and that's what's called manual enrollment. Okay, so that is the alternative right now if you're not doing, to get a machine certificate. As local admin, you do some method of manual enrollment. You run this cert request tool on the local box, or you go to a web page that will run that cert request form for you with the ActiveX controls and generate the request. So now that I have a PKCS10, I'll send that off to the CA, and then the CA will issue back a PKCS7. Remember all that information that I entered in the form, that's all embedded in here somewhere, but the CA is free to throw all that stuff out except for my public key and issue back a credential that it wants to issue, right? But the whole trick of enrollment, or the whole security of enrollment, is how securely do I get this enrollment request to the CA, and what does the CA know about me when I give it to them, right? So that when they issue the cert, who are they issuing the cert to? And that's why it matters, these level 1, level 2, or class 1, class 2, class 3 CAs. It's what assurance do they have that I am who I say I am when I give them a request? And what do they put in the request? They're probably not going to take anything I tell them, right? The only thing they have to take is a public key. And then they can issue the cert with whatever's in the cert for whatever usage, for whatever, they can't change the key size, I guess. And that's about it. Okay, so when you're thinking about PKIs, be very careful about how you do enrollment. And like I said, in Win2K, we solved the enrollment problem in a non-standard way because we had to early in the standards development process just to get something for Win2K that worked for machine auto-enrollment. In Whistler, Windows XP, we'll have user auto-enrollment working as well as machine. So as soon as you log in, you can automatically get a cert if your administrator has set that up. Okay, so I'll turn it over to these guys. Okay. You want to use this? I know you said if you were recording. Well, that's true. When you log in as administrator, you'll log in either as administrator, in which case you have access to the keys which are generated by the user, local administrator, right? And you have access, you never have access to the private key, but you can cause things to use the private key as local admin. Like you can manipulate services like IPSec and configure IPSec, which will be able to access machine certificate private keys for the purpose of signature through the APIs. So you can never really look at the private key or get access to them. Right, you can't access those because they're protected. They're in an encrypted part of the storage area, which is protected by that user's password, ultimately. A hash of the password. Nope, I don't. We have to go to the OS security guys and ask them. And I'm not sure how much they want to make public, because the more you know, the more people can try to bang on it. But I do know that it has been through internal and contracted external review to examine the security of this and as strong as they can make it. That's the claim.
Okay, so from now until I guess I got 40 minutes to do it, we're going to go on and do a more in-depth view of IPSec, and it will get kind of confusing when we get to IKE, but hopefully it'll give you a better idea of what we're dealing with there.
So feel free to ask questions, because this is going to have to be a little more interactive with how complicated IKE is.
Okay, so first thing we're going to cover is ESP. ESP is the encryption of packets, stands for Encapsulated Security Payload. This is the component of IPSec that actually does the encryption of the packets. What happens, every ESP packet must either encrypt or authenticate or both in every single packet that it processes. What that means, basically what happens is if we do both, encryption happens first and then we authenticate the encrypted data. But ESP only deals with the data that it is encrypting, right? So the network headers, they are not touched at all by ESP. Okay, so this is very similar to the same diagram as what we saw before. This is going to show what happens in transport mode. What we do is we maintain the same IP header with the exception of the data length fields. The ESP header is inserted, and this is what's in an ESP header. We've got the security parameter index, a sequence number, and an initialization vector, which when we're starting up the actual transport connection, the initialization vector is used for the encryption of the data carried in the ESP. ESP also has a trailer, the authentication data, which is going to be the authentication data for this integrity hash. The information that's generated by that integrity hash goes into this final field in the ESP trailer. And the ESP trailer, in ESP you have the ability to say that every packet is going to be a certain length, and that's supposed to cut down on traffic analysis. If every packet looks the same to the outside world, then you can't really tell what that packet's used for. So then it's gonna the trailer's gonna have all of that padding in it, the pad length, and whatever the next header is. That means in this final thing right here, wait, that's going to tell me what this right here, what this header is, because we are encapsulating any of the IP protocols can go right here, so it's going to tell me what this header is. Yeah.
So there's a couple things to realize. We talked about anti-replay detection earlier, and the anti-replay detection is covered by the sequence number here. And because this is Black Hat, I'm just going to tell you, just dump, okay? The sequence number is a 32-bit number, and it is unique. It starts at 1 for the very first ESP packet and monotonically increases, right? And it helps you manage, as a receiver, your replay window. So every time if you've seen packet number 1, you don't receive it again. Okay, and you only increment the fact that you've seen it, right? You only say that you've seen it if the authentication hash has been verified, so that nobody can modify the sequence number, send you a packet, and you say, oh, it's the sequence number 2. I haven't seen this yet, and you try to process it, and then you don't receive the real sequence number 2. So when you do anti-replay detection, you have to verify the integrity of the hash first. Then you know it's a valid packet, that it came from the guy that you set up the security association with, and then you update the sequence, the window, and the anti-replay, basically bit vector that says, I've seen this packet. The security parameter index, when you do the negotiation in IKE, which we'll show more later, you have to agree on a whole bunch of parameters, algorithms, and primarily the keys that are used to encrypt the data. So there's really no indication when you're looking at the packet what algorithms were used to encrypt it, what the key size is, that's being used to protect the packet. And in fact, if you're doing encrypted ESP, you can't tell what's inside the packet. It may be a TCP header, it may be something else. Normally the next header field in IP would show you that, but that's encrypted. So it's just an IPv4 ESP packet. That's all you really know out of the packet by examining it on the wire. But the security parameter index for the receiver, right? Imagine the receiver's got 1,000 different encrypted sessions coming into it. Well, it's got to be able to know what the right key is to decrypt the packet and what the algorithms are to deprocess it, essentially on receive. So the security parameter index is the one field that allows the receiver to know how to process it, how to decrypt the packet. So that's why it's in there. And when you set up the security association, the receiver tells the sender, hey, I want you to use this spy when you send data to me, and because it's a bidirectional negotiation, they both swap spies. So they agree on this in IKE. The initialization vector is the initialization vector for the block cipher that's being used in Win2K. It's DES or triple DES. The IETF spec specifies a whole bunch of encryption algorithms. In Windows 2000, we supported 2, which are the mandatory to implement DES, although it's 56 bits and you shouldn't use it if you can use triple DES. Triple DES is 3 independent 56-bit keys. But the initialization vector is essentially in the clear, it's random, and part of the ESP header. The ESP header is protected by the integrity hash, so you can't modify the sequence number or the initialization vector or the spy. The padding is, as Dan said, the padding is there to allow you to have fixed size packets. And it turns out, in the standard, you're supposed to be able to add 0 to 255 bytes of padding to a packet. Almost all implementations add only the padding that they need to get the the data that they're going to encrypt, meaning from this point to this point, aligned on a 64-bit boundary, because that's what DES and triple DES operate on, 64-bit blocks. So if your data comes in and it's not on a 64-bit boundary, essentially, you've got to add a little bit of data, a few bytes, to make it align on a 64-bit boundary, and that's what padding is doing. So inside the packet, you can check the pad length. Once you decrypt it, you can check to see that the pad length is, in fact, the padding that is added. And there's a spec on how to do the padding. It should be a monotonically increasing byte number. The keyed hash, as I said, is the cryptographic checksum, if you will, across this part. And the original IP header is not covered. Now, that's because they thought that you might want to modify the original IP header. Why would you want to do that? Well, there's lots of options that can be in the IP header. There's source address, dest address in there. There's a checksum field. Really, practically, most people are finding out that protecting this information is not very useful. Yes, I mean, in the other format that we'll probably show in AH, you'll protect the IP header. But by the time you're done, you're not going to accept this packet anyway unless you're able to fully deprocess it, right? And there have been no errors in deprocessing the packet. So the fact that you have, that it actually came from that IP address or that it's not spoofed, it's not going to be spoofed anyway. So you really don't have to worry about protecting the IP header, in my opinion, although I'm open for philosophical discussion on that. So the concern here is that if you're IPSec protecting your traffic, you're going to add 22 to 36 bytes, essentially, to the packet to do this extra processing. We add the minimal amount of padding that will align on a 64-bit boundary, so we don't add any extra overhead other than what's required to send the packet in an RFC-compatible manner. There is hardware acceleration in 3Com and Intel NICs for Win2K, and they may have it for other platforms that allow you to do, once you've essentially framed the packet, you can give the hardware the keys to do the actual encryption, because that's the really expensive part. Formatting the packet's not hard, but actually doing the crypto across the full packet value is quite expensive if you're doing it on every packet. Now, I mean, I can do it in software, and on a fast CPU, you'll never notice. It just depends on how much data you're transmitting. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about performance later in some of the deployment slides, or in the advanced deployment slide at the very end. So just know that there is hardware acceleration. It's done in the network card in Win2K in our design, because once you have an IP packet, you're right above the NIC. So you're just going to give the NIC the packet, and it'll send it out. Vice versa on receive. The NIC already knows how to decrypt the packets. It recognizes the spies that it can decrypt, and it decrypts and sends the packet decrypted up to the operating system. And there's a whole language and protocol between the network card driver and the stack that control this. So if your card only does DES and you're doing a triple DES IPSec SA, well, of course, it's not going to be offloaded. Okay?
Okay, the one thing I do want to bring up is that this sequence number and the anti-replay protection, it is not defined in the base RFC for IPSec, so it is not mandatory that implementations put it in there, actually do the window check. I honestly don't know of any implementations that do not do that, but it is possible that in the future one doesn't. Okay. Then we're going to move on to ESP and tunnel mode. Oh, yeah. to this slide. This is the ESP header, trailer, and auth. They all serve the same purpose in this in tunnel mode as they do in transport mode. The only real difference is that in tunnel mode, this whole information is encrypted here, and the IPSec, when it's processed, will end up putting a new IP header onto the packet. Okay, and then authentication header. Authentication header is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The authentication is applied to the entire packet with immutable fields zeroed out of the IP header. So anything that can change in the header is zeroed out before you compute the hash and before you verify the hash as well. If both ESP and AH are applied to the packet, ESP is done first and then AH is done. That is so that all of the information that ESP did is also authenticated by AH, as well as the network header. And this is a similar diagram that we had before. In transport mode, AH, it's only a header, it has no trailing information, and it will put itself in here. And expanded out, the AH header looks like this. The next header field will point to the IP type of this header here. Payload length is payload length of the packet. Reserved is just not used currently. SPI is the same as the SPI in the ESP. It will identify the essays on both ends that apply to the packet so that both endpoints will know what algorithms were used in authenticating this packet. The sequence number is also used for the replay protection. And the keyed hash, that's the actual, the meat of the authentication header. That is where the integrity hash coverage actually stores the hash that it computed on that packet. And again, before the window is moved, the packet has to pass the integrity check that the hash provided. Do you have anything to add on this one? Okay. AH in tunnel mode, it's the same as ESP in tunnel mode. It creates a new IP header, and then the integrity hash will cover the whole packet like this. And keep in mind, everything here will be visible if it's just authentication header. Okay, now IKE. IKE is the confusing part. IKE consists of two different phases. In the phase, the first phase is to establish a secure channel, which is called an ISA-KMP. ISA-KMP is a protocol for key exchange messages that was developed by the NSA. Go ahead.
Well, proposed by the NSA to the IPSec working group, and they adopted it.
It's just the way that the format of the messages that are passed in IKE. What the phase 1 does is it sets up a secure channel for the further phase 2 connections, so that the two endpoints can negotiate whatever security associations that they need to establish for IPSec to work. And then phase 2 is actually used for maintenance and a negotiation of those security associations. Sorry. Yes. Okay, there's two kinds of security associations. One of them is an ISA-KMP security association, and that consists of the encryption algorithm, key length, Diffie-Hellman types used in key exchange. Is there anything I'm missing there?
We probably have some other slides that describe the detail.
Show later in there.
I know that at least in the PKI talk that I have, I go through the detail of IKE negotiating certificate authentication, and there's quite a few things in there.
Okay, and then an IPSec SA is completely different from an ISA-KMP SA. What it's used for is the definition of the algorithms and it maintains the state of the IPSec connection between the two endpoints. For each IPSec connection, there are two SAs, one inbound and one outbound. Okay, and like I just said, main mode negotiation in IKE will create the ISACAM PSA, which is then used to negotiate the IPSec SAs. There's 3 steps in main mode. First step is going to be the SA negotiation. That's the ISACAM PSA negotiation. Second, it's going to use for Diffie-Hellman exchange or Diffie-Hellman key exchange and nonce exchange. The Diffie-Hellman is actually going to be, or the key derived from the Diffie-Hellman exchanges is actually used to encrypt the authentication phase of, or not phase, but the authentication exchange used in main mode. Okay, and this is the diagram showing how main mode exchange looks while using Kerberos. First thing that happens, this is in the SA selection part of main mode. What it sends is the ISACAM header and all of the ISACAM SAs that the initiator could use. William, did you want to show him how to set that in Windows? Or show them what's that? Okay. Of these, what happens is the responder will choose one of these SAs and reply with it in the ISACAM header. So then they have an agreement on what it is they're going to use to authenticate their session and everything from that point. Second is going to be the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So the initiator will put its part of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange in there, a nonce, and a Kerberos token. The Kerberos token is actually a token generated by the security service provider interfaces for Kerberos. So it actually uses the operating system's infrastructure to do the Kerberos exchange, and it generates the token here. The responder will send back its half of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, its nonce, and a Kerberos token that is actually part of the same exchange that the operating system just negotiated for them. Okay. The third part, the authenticated part, this whole section here is going to be authenticated. There's one exchange, so one direction and then coming back. What happens is it's going to have a header, it's going to have an ID. William, that ID is for the ISACAM. Okay, that's the main mode ID generated for this ISACAM PSA. And then this hash is derived from the Kerberos exchange that happened here, and it's used for the mutual authentication. It's to prove that Kerberos actually succeeded.
So in this case, Diffie-Hellman, the DH exchange, is what's actually generating the shared master key between the two IP addresses. So when you're done, you have 768 bits or 1024 bits of shared master key material. It's a symmetric key via the Diffie-Hellman exchange. But Diffie-Hellman by itself doesn't tell you that somebody wasn't in the middle and conducting an active man-in-the-middle attack on you, right? Because if you do the Diffie-Hellman, the way Diffie-Hellman works, and you have to go through this in your mind if you're not a cryptographer, it's G to the X mod P. Essentially what you do is you choose a random exponent. Each side chooses a random exponent, a large random exponent, like 320 bits, large. And you raise a well-known G to that exponent power. And then you take the mod value of P, which is also well-known. It's defined in the RFC. So you're taking a well-known value to a random exponent and taking the modulus of it of a well-known value. In the end, you end up with what's called the intermediate product. Okay, the Diffie-Hellman intermediate product, and that's what's in this DH exchange. It's called the KE payload. In IKE, the key exchange payload, it's part of the shared secret computation. Both sides do that. So the random number on the right and the random number on the left are different. You'll end up with different intermediate products. They exchange those, and then they complete the calculation where they raise that exponent, they raise that intermediate product to their random value, and I believe take mod p again. And then you end up, by the magic of this math, with the same shared secret, the same 768 bits or 1024 bits on each side. But what that does is it doesn't tell you that there's not somebody in the middle that was doing this computation and sending data over here and sending data over there, and by the time you're done, there's a guy in there that knows secrets, different secrets, but secrets for both sides, right? So what you have to do is authenticate the key generation, authenticate the Diffie-Hellman exchange, and that's what's happening in Kerberos or in certificates, is there's a hash value here which is based upon either your Kerberos relationship or the fact that you have a private key and you use a private key to sign all of this exchange and send that over to the other guy, and he computes that and verifies that yes, in fact, our conversation has been between us and only between us.
And what that is, that's called a liveness proof. It basically proves to each end that the other side is alive. And in the next exchange, the exact same thing happens, but in the other direction. So then this hash is computed. Both sides know how to compute that hash, and so they realize, yeah, that is this is live and it's not a replay attack. Okay, and then when it happens a little bit differently, main mode using certificates. The first part is going to be exactly the same. And so I want to make sure that it's clear that these essay proposals, the one that's actually chosen, will define the rest of the main mode negotiation. This essay proposal contains the information like, I want to negotiate using Kerberos, or I want to negotiate using certificates or shared secrets. That's where that information is exchanged. Then the responder will select one of these essay proposals and send it back to the initiator. And then they then attempt to do the Diffie-Hellman exchange. This is up till this part. The only difference is that they do not have a Kerberos token at this point. That because they are using certificates for this. Sends back the Diffie-Hellman exchange from the responder, the nods from the responder, and the certificate request, which means the responder wants to see what the initiator's certificate looks like.
Can I cover the main mode parameters over here?
Sure.
Okay, so we were talking about this very first SA payload. There's the header, but there's also SA proposals. If you go into the IPSec policy management snap-in, you go to a particular policy and you go on the general tab. Again, all of these settings, right? Believe me, I've redesigned their UI 3 times. I know it's painful. So if you have ideas on how to improve the UI, I'd like to hear them. But basically, this is the UI that we ended up with. And so for a single policy, we have a single setting on how to do main mode. And that essentially is an ordered list of algorithms. So in main mode, you're proposing, how are we going to encrypt our communication? And what key strength are we going to generate between the two? And this happens at the IP level, between the two IP addresses. So in this case, this particular policy, and you can change this, this particular policy has triple DES for encryption, SHA-1 is the integrity algorithm, and then Diffie-Hellman, I say medium value 2 here, that's 1024 bits. And then there's multiple proposals here so that you can, if one side doesn't agree on triple DES SHA-1, well, maybe it will agree on something else in the list. You as the IPSec administrator would go in and make this be what you want it to be in order to interoperate. We had to support enough options that everybody would be able to have one option in common. So people are free in their implementations to support however many options they want. There are systems that support hundreds of options. We support triple DES, DES, MD5, SHA-1, But after you're all said and done, that's still over 200,000 combinations that you could possibly configure in all these different ways in an IPSec policy. So the bottom line here is that in main mode, you're trying to decide how to encrypt your traffic and what key size to generate. What's not shown in here and what's shown in the security rules is that in main mode, you're also choosing the authentication method. So if I look at the rule, each rule has an authentication method, and it can have a list of authentication methods. So the list of authentication methods is what's proposed in main mode. So I say I want to do Kerberos first, then I'll do certs, and then maybe I'll do pre-shared key. Or maybe the proposal in main mode is I'll only do certificate authentication. But the responder has to choose, he only has one chance, he has to choose a particular authentication method. He doesn't know exactly the certs and everything yet, but he has to choose a particular authentication method as a responder in the protocol. Okay? Yeah. Oh, you want to just put the slides over there? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, on this slide, you'll see, or not slide, but on this, you'll see the Diffie-Hellman, it says medium, and then in parentheses it says 2. Of that, I believe the IPSec RFC defined 5. Of those, 1 and 2, what that is, that's a group of all of, exactly.
Sorry, yeah.
It's a group defined by the RFC of the Diffie-Hellman values to be used as the generator and the modulus in the Diffie-Hellman exchanges. And they are defined in the RFC. Of those, to be compliant with the IPSec, you need to implement 1 and 2.
So we get all this pressure to be user-friendly. And that's why we chose low and medium. Because certainly you could go higher, but we didn't support something higher. So we had to call it low and medium. So medium is the strongest that we support in Windows 2000 and in Whistler. It's the 1024-bit Diffie-Hellman.
Okay, and back to this first exchange. What happens is the initiator makes a list of all of the acceptable SA parameters that it can use. The responder is supposed to choose the one highest in the list. So the one highest in the list, this is a prioritized list sent by the initiator. The highest one in the list that they can both agree to, that's the one that's supposed to be chosen by the responder. Okay, so back to what's going on. We've now sent the certificate request. So the responder, this is now encrypted. The responder will send the certificate to the other side, as well as the signature of the certificate to authenticate the certificate. And it'll also request that the responder send its certificate back. The responder at this point in time will verify that the certificate is valid and verify, I'm sorry, I skipped a part over here in the certificate request. That will also have a list of the CAs that the responder trusts. So then this certificate, when it's returned back to the responder, must have one of the CAs accepted by the responder, and then the responder will verify the certificate. Right. If the initiator doesn't have any certificates that are agreeable to this responder, then the whole negotiation breaks down right there. Yes. Okay, so then what's used for the liveness proof here is actually going to be the signatures that are sent back with the certificates. Obviously, because of the way certificates work, only the responder should have the private key and be able to sign the certificate that it just sent across. And then this is the main mode ID that is negotiated as well.
that would be bad. And that's why the hash actually includes the SA payloads that were sent across. So the hash is not a simple hash. In the RFC, it defines the inclusion of a bunch of these things, these payloads, inside the hash. So while it's, where's the hash? Or basically the signature. The signature is the hash payload. Yeah, actually it's the signature here is the hash. Yeah, it's the signed hash. Yeah.
It's basically signing all of the shared information that they have between them.
Right, and it specifically includes the SA proposal because of exactly that problem. What it means is that you could potentially intercept this message here because this is not integrity protected, it's not encrypted. You could change what this guy was proposing to the other guy. This is what he was describing.
He's asking what this signature is. The signature is actually defined part of the SA proposal is defining the signature algorithm, and that's used as a pseudo-random function to generate, you append everything together and then compute the hash of that. Yes, yes. That is what the question was, right?
Well,
yeah, it's whatever is negotiated in what we were showing up here.
Not exactly. This signature is the private key signature of the communication. So what the SHA-1 and MD5 are keyed hashes. Okay, so you have to have a symmetric key for SHA-1 or MD5. This part here that says encrypted, it's encrypted and the communication, the encryption itself is signed, which is independent of this particular signature. This signature is the authenticator signature. The actual payload, the whole message itself, is encrypted with one of the encryption algorithms, and the MD5 and SHA-1 is run across the encrypted text using another shared key from your master key. So this is why it gets complicated, it's why it gets deep. You generated a master key as a result of this. From that master key, you derive session keys to encrypt the IKE negotiation and also to sign the IKE negotiation. But they're session keys, they're symmetric session keys. This here is, in certificate authentication, is the asymmetric private key signature of all of our conversation, which is embedded inside the encrypted message.
Okay, and the final is going to be main mode using a pre-shared key. And this is going to be the least secure that you probably don't want to implement unless it's completely necessary that you do. Same thing happens in the first exchange is exactly the same as it was for certificates. You select the SA. This SA is going to say, yes, we are going to do a pre-shared key exchange. In the third exchange here, the Diffie-Hellman key is going to be exchanged. The nonce is going to be exchanged. And the exact same thing is going to come back the other way that were generated by the responder. The encrypted, they're going to use the authentication information generated by the nonce and the pre-shared secret to generate the hash. They're going to do a main mode ID in the header, and the exact same thing comes back the other way. So this is by far the simplest of the IKE exchanges, but it's also the least secure because that shared secret is easily compromised.
So the shared secret, I typed it in up here, it's a pre-shared key. In the Windows 2000 model, if you were configuring this policy just on this local machine, just as local administrator, then nobody else can read that pre-shared key. I mean, other users, if they logged on, could read the pre-shared key. But the pre-shared key is stored in plain text inside the policy, and that policy is cached in local registry, or it's stored in the directory, okay? The reason for that is because in the directory model, or in any model where I want to protect this pre-shared key, I have to have a way of delivering the policy to the end system across the network, and for it to be able to decrypt, you know, if it were encrypted, it has to decrypt and find out what the pre-shared key was. There's no practical way to deliver policy to thousands of end systems and have every one of them know how to decrypt this particular string. Okay? I mean, it's important to understand because this comes up in IETF lists and a lot of things. In Windows 2000, if you set a pre-shared key locally as local admin, first of all, you're local admin, you know it, you can read it. When it's stored in the local registry, it's accessible only to local admin, read only for local admin. So anybody that compromises a machine can see this pre-shared key, right? I mean, if they get local admin in the registry. They have to decrypt, they have to, I'll say, reverse compile the policy formats because we don't publish those. But in the bottom line is, it's in the clear. Okay, so the way we store it on the system is not like a password. And the reason is because in policy, particularly for distributed policy, where you're configuring policy in the Active Directory and you're pushing policy to thousands of clients, that key has to be represented in a way that every client will be able to understand what it is and be able to use it. Now, when we transmit the policy across the wire, we use Kerberized encrypted LDAP, right, for transporting the policy. So nobody can passively look at the policy as it goes by and see the data in the policy. That we did take care of. But once the policy is stored or cached on the local machine, it's there, accessible to local admin. All right. The other thing is that if I'm doing a server and I want to be secure from anyone to me, and I'm specifying an authentication method, well, when you specify a pre-shared key, there's a pre-shared key, right? I mean, you can specify multiple pre-shared keys, but there's no way in IKE to say use one pre-shared key or use the other pre-shared key, right? There's no pre-shared key identifier. So you have to basically guess which pre-shared key to use. And in our initial implementation, we support essentially one pre-shared key. Although you can configure several, only one of them will take effect. Okay, so it would be an invalid configuration to have more than one pre-shared key in a particular authentication method. Now that said, imagine everybody is communicating to me and we're doing pre-shared key. What if one machine out there gets compromised and I now need to change the pre-shared key? Well, I changed the pre-shared key here. I've got a policy problem that I have to update all clients first to use a new pre-shared key before I change it on this one. Right? I can't really add another pre-shared key here very well because of the way the IKE is defined in the RFC. So bottom line is, when you do pre-shared key, everybody gets the pre-shared key and they all have to change it once when you change the pre-shared key. Bad model, right? Much better to go with Kerberos or certificates. And so that's why for all the reasons I just stated, we don't recommend you try pre-shared key. It's very useful for small testing and for demos and interoperability because everyone implements pre-shared key support first. But practically, it's very difficult to maintain the security of that pre-shared key. And for those of you who have remote access clients that use pre-shared key or machine passwords, if thousands of remote access users know the secret, it's not very much a secret anymore. Yes, you're doing user authentication on top, but realize what the IKE authentication is doing. It is your only guarantee that there is not an active man in the middle that is participating in your encrypted exchange. Okay? If you cannot positively authenticate end-to-end, then, and if your pre-shared key becomes compromised, the risk is somebody can intercept that traffic, participate in the conversation, and know all of the cryptographic key material. So they have to decrypt on receive and re-encrypt on send to participate as an active man in the middle, but they still can do it. So please do not use pre-shared key in your real deployments. Use something like certs or use Kerberos. Okay, soapbox, over.
Change your pre-shared key every time you issue a certificate. Would that help mitigate the problem?
No, if you're issuing certificates, the pre-shared key is just an option for authentication. If you're using certificates for authentication, don't use pre-shared key. You don't need it.
Now, why not store the pre-shared key after you deploy the workstation in that CA store where it's protected encrypted file system and only the user that's logged in with that policy can see the pre-shared key there, not in the local administrator?
Right. We have to store the entire policy in the protected store. And the bottom line is we didn't design it that way. We could have done that, but the policy can be arbitrarily large, and you don't have an arbitrarily large amount of space in the protected store. It could amount to a denial of service attack that you create a massive policy, shove it down to workstations, and now they can't log in because they can't get access to their protected store.
It also affects the service, doesn't it?
Well, the service has, I mean, the machine private keys. I mean, we were trying for private keys in particular, right? Very, very security critical components. Small amounts of data are what's stored in the protected store, not a bunch of data like a policy that can be arbitrarily large. So you're right, we could have potentially extracted out every pre-shared key and stored like a handle to the pre-shared key and just stored the policy in the clear with a handle to the pre-shared key. That's a lot of work. And bottom line is, use of pre-shared key is not very secure. So we said, you know, should we do a lot of work to try to protect this pre-shared key better, or can we support it because it's an RFC requirement and people should be using Kerberos or certs in general? So that's our thinking. Okay? Yes, I understand, but the private key's not, and we have a way to refer to certificates and a whole certificate infrastructure that is essentially dependent upon the storage of the private key. So there's a great amount of effort put into storage of private keys, certificate keys, and there's not that much practical reason, I'll say, by the time you're all said and done, and that's sort of the way we've been thinking about it. To do super secure pre-shared key in policy. I mean, remember it's stored in the directory. Everybody's got to be able to read it too. I mean, ideally you'd like to encrypt it. Wherever it's stored, you want to encrypt it. But now everybody who's got to read it's got to decrypt it. So that's kind of hard to store it. And I mean, that basically implies a group pre-shared key, a group symmetric key, so that everybody that reads the policy could then decrypt it.
Then it's the same. You're just protecting the keys.
Now, right. Now it's a group shared key, and it's a group encryption key as opposed to an authentication key. So there are, if you choose a weak pre-shared key, this came up, I guess, in August of '98 or October of '98. There's a fellow by the name of John Pliam, who's a cryptographer, who published what was an analysis of XAuth, the extended authentication module for IKE. And the design of XAuth is insecure to compromise of essentially the pre-shared key. So if for some reason your pre-shared key has been compromised and somebody else is masquerading as somebody you trust, this is the only method, right? If you're using pre-shared key, it's the only method of establishing trust, right? So if I know your pre-shared key that you're going to negotiate to me with, and I can get you to negotiate with me, then with XAuth, I can get you to reveal your user credentials, your user password, or at least enough of a hash so that I can do an offline password guessing attack, just by actively communicating with you. And you don't really know who I am. I just happen to know your pre-shared key. So that paper's published, and the pointer's in my slides later. So I'll just say that.
Okay, quick mode. Quick mode is the second phase of the IKE negotiation. It's actually used to create the IPSec security associations. Each quick mode exchange will, each quick mode negotiation, because there's actually more than one exchange, will result in two IPSec SAs, one inbound and one outbound. So basically defining the IPSec connection, if you will. There is something called perfect forward secrecy. What that does, each one of these quick mode exchange, or not exchange, but each quick mode negotiation is derived, the keying material is derived from what was negotiated in the main mode. From that, is the main mode ID?
There's separate identifiers in quick mode. Is that what you're asking? Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Each quick mode exchange the identifier is actually derived from the...
No, not derived from the main mode, because the quick mode is identifying something else. It's what's called the proxy ID field. Okay. It's typically the address information in our implementation in Win2K. It can be an FQDN or something else.
Okay, so this is a lot like main mode. It's a lot. They don't have to perform the authentication and establish an encrypted session, because that was already set up via main mode. So everything happens as encrypted and verified. It's a lot the same. You propose your essays in a list. The responder will select one of these essays, and they also give a hash. What was this hash? Oh, this hash is actually part of the liveness proof.
It's probably a nonce, a hash of a nonce. Probably what it is for liveness.
Right. What happens is you first send this across to the responder. The responder now has a way to prove back to you. It derives its hash from what you sent it and what you already negotiated in main mode. And this is proof of its liveness, because it's sharing, or it's showing that it has a shared secret back to you. And then the same way, the initiator has to prove to the responder that it's not being replayed. So that's what this hash computed in the third communication is. This also sets a committed byte, which is in the which is defined in the IPSec AMP. What that committed byte says is that I want to get a connected notification. This final exchange here, or this final communication here, is not necessary in all quick mode negotiations. Windows does request this connection notification, and what that is meant to do is, after this final is sent off, the initiator can start sending IPSec secured packets, because this is the final exchange, or the final piece of the exchange that identifies the IPSec SA. What this that committed byte that requires them to send a connection notification back does is it makes the initiator wait until it gets that connection notification before it starts sending secured packets, because you don't want them to get to the responder and the responder still doesn't know how to unencrypt them or even how to handle them, because they'll just be dropped. So that's what the connection notification serves.
Now, remember, what we're trying to do is establish a secure encrypted session, but we don't want to start sending data until both sides are ready, right? So that last exchange down there is trying to synchronize the sender and the receiver so that when the sender starts sending data, the receiver's ready to receive it. And all of these IKE negotiation messages have to have reliability built into them inside IKE. There's no requirement, if you will, for reliability. We're not using TCP, right? So we're just using UDP messages. These guys can get lost in the internet or lost in your local network. So basically, each IKE implementation has to implement a timer and retry intervals to make sure that the message is going, and has to have logic in there to make sure that, you know, a particular negotiation is making progress, right? There's the starvation. Well, it doesn't apply too much in user mode, but you could certainly imagine attackers getting halfway through a negotiation and then just stopping, right? Failing, it's like the TCP open, SYN open attack, where you just open a bunch of TCPs, you just never hack them finally to finish. But this is all in user mode. So one of the security properties that they were trying to get to with IPSec and IKE being a UDP packet is that the user mode process can take an enormous amount of traffic and can implement denial of service algorithms in user mode in a much more efficient way than, say, kernel mode, right? Because you have an arbitrary amount of user mode memory and virtual memory to receive messages, queue them, process timers, and so forth. Once traffic is underway, right, that's the kernel mode ESP or AH transfer, and that has its own security property, right? So if you've already set up an SA, somebody doing denial of service with you with IKE is not going to affect the ESP or AH traffic that is already established, right? It may affect your ability to respond quicker to legitimate people, but you don't necessarily know who they are. Remember that in quick mode, we're doing encrypted exchanges here, and they're authenticated exchanges as well. They're doing that MD5 or SHA-1 hash on every packet, and that hash is checked on every packet before you process what's in it, right? So if somebody sends you, the worst they can do is replay something, and then there's replay detection in IKE itself. But if somebody sends you a bogus IKE message in quick mode, it's not going to be authenticated, right? They don't have the shared key state that you established when you authenticated in main mode. So quick mode is intended to be, basically intended to rekey the IPSec key material, right? It does policy negotiation, but it's called quick mode because it's just 2 round trips and we're done. We're ready to send data. Whereas authentication was 3 round trips and a lot of processing to do Diffie-Hellman and do authentication between the machines. Okay, so main mode gets you an authenticated, encrypted negotiation channel. Quick mode allows you to very quickly set up, using that trust, very quickly set up individual key pairs for IPSec data protection. Okay, that's the difference really between main mode and quick mode. And they did this to leverage, so like in SSL, typically SSL applications, they connect, they authenticate, they do key exchange, and then they disconnect and they tear down the state, and then they're back to square one. With IPSec, you do your initial main mode negotiation. That main mode may live, in our implementation you can set it, but it typically is 8 hours. So you don't have to do another main mode for 8 hours. As long as you continue communicating with that particular IP address, you'll just do quick modes, refresh the key material. The key material has lifetimes and so forth, so you'll automatically in the background regenerate these keys. And the application really is completely transparent of all of this. But the security control is completely under the control of the administrator. Yes, sir? Yes, because SASL, the question was why wasn't SASL used to do this, the authentication and negotiation? Well, I wasn't around in 1992 and 1994 when they were probably making that decision. They felt like they needed a completely IP-based, UDP-based authentication mechanism to set up this security. And they threw out a lot of other methods, including TLS, and they had that as an example. They threw out a lot of other methods that basically relied on TCP, or implementations would be on TCP. They also felt that most people didn't have LDAP clients. I mean, they were doing gateway-to-gateway router tunneling, basically, was their original goal. And so they just wanted something that the routers could do to authenticate the routers to themselves or to each other. So imagine the way this is, quick mode also defines what a tunnel is. When you do main mode, you don't know what data you're going to send. You just know the guy's trusted, right? And quick mode is when you actually send the data, you send a proposal. That SA proposal is what data am I going to protect? That's the filter, right? It's the tunnel filter or it's the transport mode filter for the traffic that you want to protect. So you send the filter over. That's what's in the proxy ID. That's what's in the, well, it's basically the proposed SA, and there's a proxy ID field in there as well that's not shown. The SA payload includes the encryption algorithms, like I show over here. It's whether you want to do AH, whether you want to do ESP, and what algorithms you're going to choose when you do these things, and also what lifetimes. How long do you want these things to live? Now, there's no mandatory way to handle this stuff in the spec. So everybody has to kind of cook up a way of doing it, of what to receive and what to propose and how to rekey in order to be interoperable. So you can start to see now that, at least at this level of complexity, it was highly risky for us to support options that were not well tested and interoperable before we shipped. And so that's why we have well-tested, very interoperable ways of handling all these settings in here. So you can pretty much, the policy as you set it will be enforced on that system. And to the maximum extent possible, a negotiation will happen and they'll try to agree on settings. But in your experience, when you do interoperability testing or you deploy IPSec, in a lab environment first, you'll probably find that you've got some setting slightly off and the two aren't agreeing, right? Okay.
Okay, another thing to note, in this diagram, there is no quick mode ID shown here. There is a quick mode ID. Anytime after main mode, we can have a multiple number of quick mode negotiations going on at any time. Each one of them is unique. So the identifier identifies which of these quick mode negotiations is occurring in this exchange. I don't think I missed anything else.
I think that's it.
And that is the end of what I have, which I was only 10 minutes over, so.
Oh, really? Are we over time? Okay.
So, lots of questions for like stuff.
Yeah. All the control of these settings, I mean, the negotiation is by RFC. The choice of options to implement is the implementer's choice. And the behavior when you do support an option is also by implementer's choice, but also by what other people do as well. So you have to establish interoperability. Cisco iOS has been the primary reference implementation, if you will, commercial reference implementation. And that's partly why we jointly developed all of this with Cisco, so that we could guarantee interoperability with Cisco. And at the moment, I believe Cisco is the only product that we guarantee, I'll say, interoperability. But as you can imagine, vendors that have a shorter ship cycle than Windows, say iOS, right, which releases new versions of iOS every 2 months or 3 months, they are continually evolving their support for options. And they're continually testing to make sure that they don't change the behavior that was established in, say, iOS 11.3 when they ship iOS 12.1 or 12.1.3. So in some cases, say in the handling of that commit bit or the connected notify, something like that, they may accidentally or on purpose change, and then interoperability will be affected. I'll give an example. In Win2K 2195, we padded, you remember the padding in the IPSec ESP formats? We padded 0 to 7 bytes. But we accepted up to 8 or 9 bytes of padding if somebody wanted to support that. In Win2K SP1, we did a lot of work to make the padding checks more secure. And when we did that, we only accepted 0 to 7 bytes of padding. And it turned out that iOS, when they needed 0 bytes of padding, they used 8 bytes of padding. So we no longer accepted certain size packets of ESP, and that was completely by accident, and we didn't catch it before we shipped. So SP1 will have some ESP packets be dropped as a result of it being padded 8 bytes as opposed to 0 to 7. We quickly discovered this and put out a QFE, and now it's fixed in SP2, right, for general distribution. So if you're doing Cisco iOS interop testing and you happen to see a few ESP packets are being dropped, that's largely the reason, and we have a QFE available for that. But you know, these are tiny little things that, you know, one value changed, one option anywhere in the protocol can just cause a fairly major impact. Good question. I should give you a T-shirt. I wanted to have gifts to hand out, and I didn't get that together. MTU, basically what happens is the stack is aware. So MTU is reported up to the application by the TCP or UDP stacks. For TCP applications, they'll reduce the interface MTU when they'll basically auto-generate an ICMP internally within the stack. And it'll, when they find out that the traffic is going to be IPSec protected, they'll auto-generate and reduce the MTU automatically. So you will not fragment TCP traffic. It's handled internally within the stack. When it recognizes TCP packets are too big for the IPSec protection that will be applied to them, they auto-generate and reduce the MTU, and then the new packet is resent with the right MTU. Well, it's handled via TCP's, TCP, the interface MTU value from TCP. That's basically where it's handled. It's basically TDI, technically.
So it'll change that for all traffic being sent to the host.
All traffic that is protected by an IPSec SA to the host. There may be TCP connections that are going to a host that are not IPSec protected, in which case they would not have the MTU reduction.
So it creates a separate interface from the SAs if you're not using like the L2F or LTP?
No, it's, let me show you a stack diagram, and then maybe you can understand. So it's my turn right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So would you guys prefer to take a little bit of a break before we go on to the next part, or do you want to just keep going?
Okay, let's do 5 minutes, and that puts us back here at, or 3 minutes, whatever, Bathroom break. We'll start at 5 till.